This is the story of how my bed was floating 2 inches off the floor. For the last few months, I've been doing some work in my bedroom. I had to gut the closet and then install a new floor and some shelving. It took me a couple of weekends to get it all done, but I finished up just before Christmas. And once that was all done, I got to finally finish up my dream closet and put all of my clothes back where they belong. When I first moved into this house, I ripped out the closet doors because I didn't need them, and I never planned on putting anything back in there. So I installed some drywall, painted it, and eventually I came up with a plan for all of the stuff that I was going to put in the closet. For the last 2 years, I've been working with what I had. I put up some shelves and I organized as best I could, but nothing was ever really in the right place. There were boxes everywhere. My wife and I would trip over each other trying to get to the back of the closet, but now I can finally put all of that stuff where it belongs. While I was ripping out the old closet, I found this big bag of Legos that I built almost 20 years ago. I don't know why I kept this thing for so long. I pulled it out of the closet and I tossed it onto the bed. That's when I noticed something strange. The entire bed was floating about 1.5 inches above the floor. This wasn't normal. My bed doesn't just float. In fact, my bed hasn't floated in many years. You see, back in high school, I had a very unique mode of transportation. I drove a 1984 Chevy Citation. This car was awesome. It handled like a dream. It looked amazing. It had a 2-inch lift kit, a straight pipe exhaust, and it was supercharged. The engine bay was full of custom wiring because the supercharger needed its own dedicated fuse box. My dad helped me build this car, and he helped me troubleshoot the countless electrical problems that I had along the way. When you supercharge an engine, there's always a chance that it's not going to work out. But in this case, it worked better than anyone expected. This car was super fun to drive, and people like my physics teacher, Mr. Dixon, absolutely hated it. Mr. Dixon hated my car for 2 reasons. First, it was fast, which made him look bad because he drove a 1994 Ford Escort that was completely stock. Second, my car floated. You see, the reason why my car floated was because I removed the torsion bars from the front suspension. When you remove the torsion bars from a front-wheel drive car, it makes it impossible to keep the car aligned. It wants to turn to the left or right all the time. To counter that, I installed air shocks on all 4 corners. These air shocks were set at the perfect height, which allowed the car to float over bumps and imperfections in the road. I drove this car to school every day, and everyone who rode with me came away with a newfound appreciation for air shocks. Mr. Dixon was one of those passengers. He rode with me from Daytona Beach to Orlando after I picked him up from the beach. By the end of the ride, he decided that he wanted a set of air shocks for his Escort. A couple of weeks later, I installed a set of air shocks on his car. If he had just left the torsion bars in there, his car would have floated too, but I digress. What does a 30-year-old story about a supercharged Chevy Citation have to do with my bed floating 2 inches off the floor? Well, you might be thinking that the answer is just bad engineering, but that's not true. Back in those days, engineers at GM knew exactly what they were doing. They designed a lot of great cars, trucks, and even vans. In fact, the guy who led the engineering team for the Citation also led the engineering team for the Chevy Astrovan. And no one has figured out yet why the Astrovan drives like a dream. The real reason why my bed was floating is because of the tires. I parked my car outside next to the garage on concrete blocks. Those concrete blocks were perfectly level, and so was the ground underneath them. But what I didn't realize was that the rubber tires were actually expanding. They weren't perfectly round anymore. They were a little bit egg-shaped. And because they were sitting on concrete, the flat part of the tire was on the ground. But the rounded part of the tire was compressing the air spring. This compressed air forced the tire to expand, which lifted the car up a little bit. If I had moved the car into the garage, the tires wouldn't have expanded as much. They would have been sitting on the concrete floor, and they would have compressed less. So when I went to park the car in the garage, I noticed that it didn't quite sit as low as it did outside. As soon as I realized what was happening, I backed the car out of the garage and onto the grass. Then I deflated the tires a little bit. As soon as they lost a little air, the car sank down to the ground. Once I got the car parked where I wanted it, I was able to top off the air springs. And my car sits where it belongs and my bed is back on the floor. So there you go. It's the story of how my bed was floating 2 inches off the floor. Do you have a crazy car story from your teenage years? If so, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. My favorite story will win a 2024 Cooter calendar. Just make sure that you leave your social handle in the comments. so I can contact you if you win. I'll tell you what else I love. Fixing broken power tools. That's right. I fix broken power tools for a living, and I'm pretty good at it too. These are some of the tools that I fixed this week. First, we have this DeWalt orbital sander. Someone was using this sander to sand concrete, and that caused the carbon brushes to melt. The brushes were rubbing against the housing, and it created enough heat to burn through the insulation. All I had to do was replace the brushes, and now it's back in business. Next up, we have this rigid 5-horsepower router. Someone brought this router to a local woodworking show that I was at. We were having nothing but problems with it. It wouldn't stay running. It would only run for a few seconds, and then it would overheat and shut off. After talking to them for a while, I realized that the problem was user error. They were using the wrong bit in the router. We're using a compression router bit, and the router would only run for a few seconds. And then the motor would overheat, and the thermal overload would kick in. I told them to try a standard router bit, and that should solve their problem. Then we have this old Black & Decker workmate. This thing is 30 years old, and it needs a paint job, but mechanically it's perfect. All it needed was a good cleaning. This thing has a ton of life left in it. Look at these nice smooth slides. And finally, we have this Makita 1/2-inch impact wrench. It wouldn't engage the forward or reverse until I held the trigger in a certain spot. I opened it up and wiggled the wires around, and then I realized that the problem was a bad switch. Thankfully, these switches are cheap and easy to replace. And now, it works perfect. Do you have a tool that needs fixing? So, drop me a line. I'd love to help you out. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.